Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And thank you for joining today. I'm going to talk about AI life insurance valuations um, using deep neural networks. And I hope that you find this interesting. um, so, how did I get involved in this area of the world? I was first evaluations actually for many years. And then I played my hand a little bit in research for more than the last 10 years, um, specifically looking to find the solution space in a deep neural network or other machine learning technologies that will be able to perform life insurance valuations. And it took me a long time to develop a model that actually works. And I'm very excited today to bring you a model that actually does what I will claim it to. Um, so one thing one has to consider is that for life insurance, you cannot be accurate on the on average. You need to be accurate on every model point. And model point is defined as a policy and evaluation basis. Let's call it a scenario. So all the scenarios and all the policies needs to be accurate. I actually did my PhD on this as well. It is handed in, and I have good sleep on it so far. Let's say that the examiner agree. But what I've done is that everything was developed from scratch. I used the absolute minimum libraries that is available, custom loss functions, custom initialization, custom stopping. Everything is custom. And also, yeah, it's a combination not only of computer science skills, but obviously you need actuarial valuations background, as well as the interpretation of numbers. You need to be a data scientist. You need to be able to perform mathematical calculations, especially on the stochastic gradient descent. And then common sense, maybe the most important one. Um, Common sense is what guided me to complete this. And yeah, let's delve into it. So why deep neural networks? It's to capture the complexities. The solution space is not linear, and um, we want to optimally use the computer's power. And I will get to some of this later as to how to train. But we basically going to use GPUs. We're going to use matrices to solve the net present value formula that actually has been used for decades, centuries, for a long time. Um, yeah, so we combine policyholder data, policy features, and valuation bases. And what we output is the net valuation reserve at time period 0 to time period 60 or 120 or 720, depends on what scale you want to use it. Um, then, obviously, the model itself is very small. It's basically a sum of weights and bias vectors. And that is then ported to the client to enable the client to use the model on the client's own infrastructure. Typically, a laptop is sufficient. And yeah, it's fast and it can be used to in real time calculate reserves, like in seconds, depending if it's millions of policies. Um, so it enable real time valuations, real time portfolio management. And like I said, it doesn't require significant infrastructures or costs. The reason deep neural networks is better than other machine learning technologies is that you have more hands-on hyperparameter tuning that enables you to fit the model to perfection using more customized procedures. Um, yeah, and I've developed methods that don't fit the data; it fits the formula, and that is what we want to do. So here is an example of input data to the neural network. The first 19 variables are categorical data, and you will see that the means, this is the means, right, of all the data is less than one. If there's only one category, the mean is a half, and if there are four categories, the mean for each category is 0.25 approximately. The reason why they don't add up to one, because of linear dependence. There is a class 4 for each of these with three categories, and that class will be a 1, and then the other classes are zeros. So you remove a category in order to get all your indicators correct. And then my train data is similar to my data, and my validation is similar to my train, and my test data, the mean is similar to my training data. Just maybe for those that don't know, the training data is used to train. The validation data is used to indicate when do we stop training, and then the test data is totally independent of all of this. This was not for a life insurance company, so this is just an example. Um, the continuous variables, in this case, there was only these two. Let's take the age. The average age on all my data was 41.5, but after normalization, remember we normalized the continuous variables, the training data, the validation data, and the test data have similar means. They also have similar standard deviations, but I didn't allow, or I'm not going to show or talk about that due to time constraints. Let's go on, please. Okay, so let's get to the fun part. How do we structure the deep neural networks? Now, most of this is part of the hyperparameters. And this is not, this is, this is very specialized knowledge that I'm sharing with you today. Um, yeah, after a long time sorting out what exactly needs to be done. So in your input layers, that's something that you cannot control too much, although you can control on the valuation basis, especially to what level of detail you want to go in. You should limit your input layers, and you should also not limit it. There's a balance between having sufficient details and it's trial and error sometimes. But after a few valuations, you get to know what is the important variables, similar to experience with life insurance valuations. Actuaries, they know what is the important criteria that influence the reserves. Okay, but you pass it in one input vector that contains all of your policyholder features, your product features, and your valuation basis features for that run. And obviously, you'll do multiple runs with similar policyholder details. Then, as to the structure, the width and the depth of your neural network, you use dense layers, fully connected layers, and you must take care to use a continuous activation function. Um, what that actually means is that typically in the literature, you'll find that ReLU is advised to be used for these types of problems. But the moment you have zeros, is a big problem when you need to calculate derivatives with regards to the weights. So rather or I use a continuous activation function in the ReLU space, but not ReLU specifically. Then another popular claim is that you must use dropout, L1, L2 regularization. You should never do that in any machine learning problem, but especially not here, because if you want to fit the formula, right, you always need to work with the aim of finding the solution that solves the formula. And now think about the net present value formula. Say you say age is not important, then obviously you're not going to be able to solve that formula. Okay, and the model will never converge as well. Um, so I don't use any dropout, and I don't advise anybody to use it for these problems. Your output layer is your prediction and projection of your reserves. Okay, so it will either be if you only target day zero valuation reserves for statutory reporting or for publication, then it could only be as small as one, which is the easiest, obviously. But yeah, you can have intervals of months, years, depending on what input data you receive to train. Um, then the loss function, again, popular belief is MSE. Um, for this problem, it doesn't work because we need to be accurate on every model point, not only on the large model points. And when I show you the results, I will show you the impact of training on MSE instead of what you should be training, and that is the sum after you calculate absolute individual errors on every model point. It's a key thing. And also, when I first started, I used libraries, and libraries actually don't have this function correctly. So um, this is what you should be using. Then the Adam optimizer doesn't have any nester of momentum. So you should definitely be using NADM, especially when we want to get to 99.5% accuracy on every single model point. So NADM, nester of Adam, you have a learning rate, and you also have a first and second order momentum parameter that says, but how much of the previous movement should you be taking into consideration for the next update of your weights and biases? So it's extremely important that NADM is used. Continuing from the previous slide, yes, there are more. So the sampling, I already discussed some of this. Similar means and standard deviations for all the variables in all three or data sets. But there's also maybe a caveat that you must look at that you have enough extreme values, right? So oversampling from the categories where there are fewer values is advisable. For your mini batch sizes, that is what we do when we do per epoch updates. We don't give the model all the data because then there's a massive um, matrix that it needs to solve. So having smaller sizes also lets the model look at more policy specific or basis specific features. Too low, your problem is then it fits every single one, but it doesn't converge. And in the end, we all know that the computer likes to cheat, so it will tend to fit to the data and not the full formula. So there needs to be a reasonable amount of model points passed on for every epoch. My rule of thumb is 20 to 40 mini batches per epoch as a multiple. If you have it too high, right, then the matrix will not capture the small important features or smaller important features. So instead of using dropout and regularization, I control this with mini batch sizes only. And this is my golden ratio. The learning rate and momentum, you should take care not to have too high learning rate and momentum, because once the model goes into the wrong direction in a large step or update, then it's very difficult to get back to the true solution. In fact, it might actually go on and on and on the wrong trend if your momentum is also too high. So aim for lower values, maybe longer updates initially. Once you get the knack of that your architecture is correct, you have the correct amount of layers and depth of each layer, then you can see the rate at which it trains. You can check that it's training in the correct direction. So what does that mean, the correct direction? It means that your training loss and your validation loss moves in the same direction and with the same magnitude. Okay. So that's these two go hand in hand together, right? So you will have to, while it's training, look at the size and direction of the training and validation losses. Okay. So once you get close to 99 point something, but not yet point 0.5 accuracy, then it gets very difficult to get higher, right? Because it's very small changes. So that is when you need to have an optimal stopping time. Again, it might be related to the training and validation losses. For example, the training loss is slightly improving, but the validation loss is getting larger and larger. Typically, those graphs that you see in literature. Um, but there is a different methods, again, using momentum, that you can look at the changes over a time period of training, so over a few epochs or maybe 10 or 20 epochs, look at what's going on. And then when you find that you have the optimal model, then it's time to stop. Um, and I sneaked one in here at the end. It's actually pretty important. When you design your model and you define all the inputs and layers and neurons per layer, it's important that you initialize this randomly. There's a paper by He et al. 2015, image recognition, very important. Although it's for images, it's very important for individual life valuations as well, that you don't start off training with your weights equal to zero. So this initialization sets the weights to be non-zero, small non-zero, but we know that the moment a weight is a zero, the derivative will be a zero and that weight will never be updated. So initialization again, it's the opposite of regularization, but very important for these problems. So this is just a summary of where we are at the moment. I assume that you are able to use ChatGPT or something to write you some code in the program language that you prefer. Most people use Python these days. I myself use Julia. The reason I use Julia is because it's better on my computer, at least on the GPU on which you're going to train, and um, it's more custom friendly, so you can build more functions custom wise. Which one is best? I'm not going to go into that argument or discussion. You should use any. You can use SAS. You can use R. There's many alternatives as long as you know what you're doing. So yeah, we use the NADM optimizer, mini batch training, and that gives me also the mini batches doesn't go onto all of the model points onto your GPU at one time. So you could get away with training on this GPU, and it's also faster because the matrices that it needs to solve is smaller. So yeah, multi-threading is something that is Julia native, so that's what I use. Um, then use my specific absolute mean, absolute error, which means that every loss is equally important, right? So you need to be accurate on every policy. So logic is, common sense is, you should use the mean absolute error, not the MSE. Then definitely you should adjust the learning rate and momentum. Um, you, you must watch what's going on in the training, and as the model trains, you will find that maybe it's now at the local minimum. A local minimum would be that it's not over 99% accurate yet, and it is not improving. So that is when you should think about adjusting both the learning rate and the momentum, typically hand in hand, but not necessarily. Again, it's uh, sometimes it's only the learning rate, sometimes only momentum. Maybe as a guide, that momentum is more important if you are already at 99%. Um, so if you say reduce the momentum or well increase the momentum, it means that you should be able to get from 99 to 99.5 plus percent because you are by increasing the momentum, you are looking at a new solution space. You're not taking into the consideration the previous losses as one golden point I can drop into your pocket. And yeah, I advise that you use custom runtime functions. I'm not going to go into too much of that today because it's its own presentation. But yeah, um, you should look at the history of losses always, maybe graphically as well, but in a formula sense, devise a formula that should be able to tell you when stopping times are done. There has been work done on this 2016 paper, but yeah, we can go into more detail about this later. Right. So, what is the graphical interpretation of the reserves? On the left hand side, I have term assurance, and on the right hand side, I've got whole life. It these two products have been trained on the same model, but because term assurance, as for my exercise, had less model points, you can see the impact of not having equal amounts of model points. So we are comparing actual to expected values, and the blue lines is the zero reserve, and the yellow line is of the 4 years projected reserves. Okay, and you can see on the extremes, which is a deficit of training with mean absolute error. Right, so it's proof that using MAE uh, will tend to not fit your extremes as well as your typical values. Um, but the real reason why there's a discrepancy between um, the output on a product level is because imbalanced data. So I didn't sample enough from my term assurances, which typically has lower reserve. You can see the magnitude for the whole life is to the 10 to the power 6, and this one 10 to the power 5, and 5 to the power 10 to the power 4. So um, let's talk about the good thing. This is how 99.5% looks. It's about 100,000 policies, and this is on my test data. Um, I will have in the next slide, I have a quick table which shows how accurate it is in total. But you need to investigate on a policy level and on a valuation basis level these graphs to make sure that all of them look like the straight line and not something like this. I also talked about, especially for this model point, you'll see close to zero is always the issue. Um, Not because of the amount of model points, but close to zero, the computer has issues. um, in absolute terms, yes, it might be small, but still, if a company has reserves all close to zero, then we have an issue. So yeah, this one was not trained well, and while if you have trained it well, you will not have that issue at zero, and also not at the extremes. This graph has 10 different colors because this is for time periods 0 up to year 10. So, sorry, 11 different colors. Um, not going to count them for you, but yeah, this is how it should look when you have trained the model well. And this is on an actual model that was trained. And yes, um, able to perform valuations immediately almost is a real benefit. So on this slide, we have actual live data from the client, and this is how the model fitted to it. It's not as pretty as the previous one because the previous one, the test data was still Kriging method data. This is the actual client's data. Um, and it is in total on specific pricing bases very accurate, 99.98% accurate. And then on one pricing basis, it is less than 99.5% accurate. Again, if you investigate the graph, you see that close to zero is where the problem is. And also you'll see many models that has even like a football shape around zero. So this model is still on average, I think, suitable to be used in a production environment for statutory reporting and other reporting types. Um, um, yeah, so close to zero, it's like for the computer, it's um, if it goes very close to zero, a small change, positive or negative, is not as big an issue as when the reserve is large. Um, then if we look at not only at the pricing basis, but also at using random data, I don't have the graph here, but I used random data and it was still 99.2% accurate. And then the same model was also trying to predict premiums. Now, premiums is a much easier exercise. I think you're using the risk discount rate instead of the valuation rate, and you don't really care about reserving. So the model was even more accurate just to calculate premiums for insurance contracts. Um, the sum of these premiums are four products: whole life, term insurance, endowment insurance, and annuities. And it was even on a product level, if I have to split this out, it was pretty accurate on all of those products. So yeah, definitely another proves that uh, neural networks definitely, in my opinion, is the way to go, and I would dare to say the only way to go. Let's look at the further conclusions that I have arrived at. So interpretability, aka XAI, explainable AI, and regulatory compliance. And you need to be able to explain, similar to those straight line methods, that your model is accurate on every policy. You don't have lines that is or pieces of the line that's not lying inside the 99.5% confidence interval. And you need to compare the output of the model, to the traditional method, and enable you to tell the actually, but why do you need a financial calculator and why do you need a table? You don't need it. Then, in terms of interpretability, especially, I think we shouldn't say, but yes, we've used SHAP and Lime and other methods to say that this variable is important and it's important to this magnitude because we actually know this. What I propose is that we use sensitivity and scenario analysis, right? To compare many different bases to what the what common sense tells you the direction should be, i.e., a decrease in your valuation discount rate leads to an increase in reserve. Increase in your mortality assumptions for protection business leads to increase in reserve, right? Common sense. Lapses increase leads to a different and lower reserve, right? So all of those tests are done using traditional actuarial methods and not using um, statistical methods or others. Um, what I actually does do, what I do is I use principal component analysis on my predicted reserves to say that the input variables has meaningful correlation between my principal components. For example, if my first principal component gives age, sum assured, and term, as the main um, parts of the first principle component. Then the first principle component is a policy feature. And the second principle component should be a valuation basis exclusive component. And the third may be a product type. Okay, so I just made that up, but you get what I mean. Your principal component analysis based on the predicted reserves is another technique to make AI explainable. Okay, so um, if you look at my tables and my graphs, you'll see that it is 99.5 plus percent accurate. And what I would like to say is that therefore the model speaks for itself. We don't need those extra things. We don't need complexities like regularization. Um, as Hans Niemann said it, chess speaks for itself, the chess. The model speaks for itself. It's accurate. Okay, so that is where I want to move the conversation to, um, but we will get there. And then yeah, um, another way to make it interpretable is to perform joint traditional valuations and neural network valuations, compare the results over years of data, over previous valuations. It can be easily as because the previous valuations were already run. The data is available, the results are available. So it should be very easy to incorporate it. And then similarly to how IFRS and other new methods were implemented in the actuarial valuation space, um, combining it with a neural network valuation to show that the neural network produces similar results, I think is the way in which we can integrate neural networks in the future. But to summarize, neural networks, in my opinion, have the advantage to capture all the tight relationships between data, um, and it, if trained correctly, um, architecture correct, it will revolutionize the traditional actuarial valuation space. Like I said, I use Julia for many capabilities that it has. Um, and I'm also able to provide a runtime environment to a client for unlimited local valuations. And that client can be a life insurance company, an auditor, or the regulator to check valuations quickly. There is one challenge that I'm not able to address fully, and that is if a company introduces new products or drastically different valuation bases um, that the model was not trained on. I'm not sure it will be able to perform to 99.5% accuracy on an individual model point. Therefore, the training is very important that once training starts, that all the scenarios are considered, all the possible product and policyholder landscapes are considered. Oops. So, um, future directions actually should explore neural networks, um, maybe share what they find, and um, follow best practices. Still to be decided on, right? It's a new developing field. I wouldn't say it's mature, but I hope that my inputs into the field will help to make it more mature, help to make it because we actually should be spending time interpreting the output, not doing data work, modeling work. Um, if we can find a better and cheaper way to do these valuations, it will save the company money and ultimately the policyholder as well as the shareholder. So these are the reasons why I decided to share this with you today, to make this world a better place. Hopefully, you can disagree with me, but I'm an optimistic person, and I'm very optimistic about neural networks performing life insurance valuations. Okay, so that's me. I'm opening the floor for questions. I understand there's 15 minutes. So please, I'm here, hopefully, if, future tense. So please, if you have any questions or you want clarification on anything that I mentioned, now's the time.